I shouted myself to a new book for Christmas, and it's a real revelation. Beautifully presented and illustrated, it's a collection of personal letters and first-hand accounts of the Australian experience from the First Fleet through to the Great War. The book is called Australian Voices and is edited by Ariana Klepac and John Thompson. In coming weeks, I hope to share more and more of it with you. For starters, here's a letter from a George Worgan, a surgeon with the First Fleet, to his brother Richard back in England. The date is 12th of June 1788. In doing the reading, I fancied that the great English actor Edward Fox would be ideal for the part. Unfortunately, I couldn't contact him. So I had a go myself. Edward, old chap, I apologise in advance for my impetuosity. The best I can say is that we are both about the same age and born in April. You're not quite a Taurus, but I won't hold that against you. I'm Kim Dodsworth, Queensland storyteller. Dear Richard, I think I hear you saying, "Where the deuce is Sydney Cove, Port Jackson?" and see you whirling the letter about to find out the name of the scribe. Perhaps you've taken up Salmon's Gazetteer. If so, pray spare your labour and attend to me for half an hour. We sailed from the Cape of Good Hope on the 12th of November 1787. As that was the last civilized country we should touch at, in our passage to Botany Bay, we provided ourselves with every article necessary for forming a civilized colony. Livestock consisting of bulls, cows, horses, mares, colts, sheep, hogs, goats, fowls, and other living creatures by pairs. We likewise procured a vast number of plants, seeds, and other garden articles such as orange, lime, lemon, quince apple, pear trees, in a word, every vegetable production that the Cape afforded. Thus equipped, each ship like another Noah's Ark, we steered for Botany Bay. And after a tolerably pleasant voyage of 10 weeks and 2 days, Governor Phillip had the satisfaction to see the whole of his little fleet safe at anchor in the said bay. As we were sailing in, we saw 8 or 10 of the natives sitting on the rocks on the south shore, and as the ships boarded pretty near there too, we could hear them hollow and observe them talking to one another very earnestly, at the same time pointing towards the ships. They were of a black reddish sooty colour, entirely naked, walked very upright, and each of them had long spears and a short stick in their hands. Soon after the ships had anchored, the Indians went up into the wood, lit a fire, and sat around it, as unconcerned, apparently, as though nothing had occurred to them. 2 boats from the Sirius were now manned and armed, and the governor, accompanied by Captain Hunter and several other officers, went towards the shore where they had seen the natives, who, perceiving the boats making towards the beach, came out of the wood and walked along some distance from the waterside. But immediately on the boat's landing, they scampered up into the woods again with great precipitation. On this, the governor advised that we should seem quite indifferent about them, and this apparent indifference had a good effect, for they very soon appeared in sight of us. When the governor held up some beads, red cloth, and other baubles, and made signs for them to advance, but they still were exceedingly shy and timid, and would not be enticed by our allurements, which the governor perceiving, he showed them his musket, then laid it on the ground, advancing singly towards them. They now seeing that he had nothing in his hands like a weapon, one of the oldest of the natives gave his spears to a younger and approached to meet the governor, but not without discovering manifest tokens of fear and distrust, making signs for the things to be laid on the ground, which the governor complying with, he advanced, took them up, and went back to his companions. Another came forth and wanted some of the same kind of presents, which were given to him by the same method. At length, after various methods to impress them with the belief that we meant them no harm, they suffered us to come up to them. And after making them all presents, which they received with much the same kind of pleasure which children show at such baubles, just looking at them, then holding out their hands for more, some laughing heartily and jumping extravagantly, they began to show a confidence, and became very familiar and curious about our clothes, feeling the coat, waistcoat, and even the shirt, and on seeing one of the gentlemen pull off his hat, they all set up a loud whoop. One was curious enough to take hold of a gentleman's hair that was queued, and call to his companions to look at it. This was the occasion of another loud whoop, accompanied with other emotions of astonishment. In a word, they seemed pretty well divested of their fears, and became very funny fellows. They suffered the sailors to dress them with different coloured papers and fools' caps, which pleased them mightily. The strange contrast these decorations made with their black complexion brought strongly to my mind the chimney sweepers in London on a May Day. They were all men and boys in this tribe. I should have told you that the governor left the Sirius soon after we sailed from the Cape of Good Hope and embarked on board the supply brig, and gave up the command of the convoy to Captain Hunter in order that he might proceed on before the main body of the fleet. But he arrived in Botany Bay only 2 days before us. In this time he had obtained an intercourse or two with some natives on the north shore, but as the means which he took to gain their confidence and effect a parley were much the same as those I have given you an account of, I shall only mention a few singular circumstances that occurred in these intercourses. The supply brig arrived in the bay about 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 18th of January, and at 4 o'clock the governor, attended by several officers, went in 2 armed boats towards a part of the shore where 6 of the natives were, and had been sitting the whole time the supply was entering the bay, looking and pointing at her with great earnestness. When the boats had approached pretty near this spot, 2 of the natives got up and came close to the water's edge, making motions, pointing to another part of the shore, and talking very fast and loud, seemingly as if the part to which they pointed was better landing for the boats. They could not, however, discern anything unfriendly or threatening in the signs and motions which the natives made. Accordingly, the boats coasted along the shore in a direction for the place to which they had been directed, the natives following on the beach. In the meantime, the governor, or somebody in his boat, made signs that they wanted water. This they signified by putting a hat over the side of the boat, and seeming to take up some of the salt water, put it to his mouth. The natives immediately understood this sign, and with great willingness to oblige, pointed to the westward, and walked that way, apparently with an intention to show their visitors the very spot. The boat steered towards the place, and soon discovered the run of fresh water, opposite to which they landed, and tasting it found it to be very good. The natives had stopped about 30 yards from the place where the boat landed, to whom the gentlemen made signs of thanks for their friendly information, at the same time offering presents and doing everything they could think of to make them lay aside their fears and advance towards them. But this point was gained only by the methods that I have mentioned. And when they did venture to come and take the things out of the governor's and the other gentlemen's hands, it was with evident signs of fear. The gentlemen, now having distributed all their presents among them, returned on board. Thus was our first intercourse obtained with these children of nature. About 12 of the natives appeared the next morning on the shore opposite to the supply. They had a dog with them, something of the fox species. The governor and the same gentlemen that were of his party yesterday went on shore, and very soon came to a parley with them. There were some of their acquaintances among the number, and these advanced first leaving their spears with their companions who remained behind at a little distance, as they had done yesterday. They all of them in a short time became confident, familiar, and vastly funny, took anything that was offered them, holding out their hands and making signs for many things that they saw, laughed when we laughed, jumped extravagantly, and grunted by way of music, and repeated many words and phrases after us. The gentleman, having passed about an hour with them, returned on board, but could not induce any of the natives to accompany them there. A party of us made an excursion up an arm in the north part of the bay, where we had not been long landed before we discovered among the bushes a tribe of the natives, who at first did not discover such an inoffensive and friendly disposition as those I spoke of above, for these rude unsociable fellows immediately threw a lance, which fell very near one of the sailors, and stuck several inches in the ground. We returned the compliment by firing a musket over their heads, on which I thought they would have broken their necks with running away from us. About an hour after, we, in our ramble, fell in with them again. They stood still, but seemed ready for another start. One of us now laid down the musket and advanced towards them singly, holding out some baubles and making signs of peace. In a little time they began to gain confidence, and two of them approached to meet the gentleman who held out the presents. The introduction being amicably settled, they all joined us, and took the trinkets we offered them. The same emotions of pleasure, astonishment, curiosity, and timidity appeared in these poor creatures, as had been observed in our first acquaintances. There were some old and young women in this tribe, whom the men seemed very jealous and careful of, keeping them at a distance behind some young men who were armed with spears, clubs, and shields, apparently as a guard to them. We could see these curious Evites peeping through the bushes at us, and we made signs to the men who were still with us that we wished to give some trinkets to the women, on which one of their husbands, or relations as we supposed, holloed to them in an authoritative tone, and one of these wood nymphs, as naked as Eve before she knew shame, obeyed, or obliged, and came up to us. We presented her with a bracelet of blue beads for her obliging acquiescence. She was extremely shy and timid, suffering us very reluctantly even to touch her. Indeed, it must be merely from the curiosity to see how they would behave on an attempt to be familiar with them that one would be induced to touch one of them, for they are ugly to disgust in their countenances, and stink of fish oil and smoke. Most sweetly, I must not omit mentioning a very singular curiosity among the men here, arising from a doubt of what sex we are. Far from our not having, like themselves, long beards, and not seeing when they open our shirt bosoms, which they do very roughly and without any ceremony, the usual distinguishing characteristics of women, they start back with amazement, and give a hum, with a significant look implying, "What kind of creatures are these?" As it was not possible for us to satisfy their inquisitiveness in this particular by the simple words yes or no, we had recourse to the evidence of ocular demonstration, which made them laugh, jump, and skip in an extravagant manner. In a tribe of these funny, curious fellows, one of them, after having had his curiosity gratified by this mode of conviction, went into the wood, and presently came forth again, jumping and laughing, with a bunch of broad leaves tied before him, by way of a fig-leaf veil. Before we took our leave of the tribe that threw the lance, they endeavoured to convince us that it was not thrown by general consent, and one of them severely reprimanded the man who threw it, and several of them struck him, but more to show us their disapprobation of what he had done than as a punishment for it. During our stay at Botany Bay, the governor had made himself well acquainted with the situation of the land, nature of the soil, etc., etc., which he, not finding so eligible as he could wish for the purpose of forming a settlement, he determined, before he fixed on it, to visit an inlet on the coast, about 12 miles to the northward of this bay, which our great circumnavigator, Captain Cook, discovered and named. in honour of one of the then Commissioners of the Navy, Port Jackson. Accordingly, the governor, attended by a number of officers, went in 3 boats on this expedition, and the 3rd day they returned, and gave it as their opinion that Port Jackson was one of the most spacious and safe harbours in the known world, and said they had already fixed on a spot on which the settlement was to be formed. In consequence of this success, the idea was entirely given up of establishing a colony at Botany Bay, and 3 days after, the wind favouring our designs, the fleet sailed for Port Jackson, and in the evening of the day of our departure, we arrived and anchored in one of the many beautiful coves which it contains, which cove, sir, the governor has, in honour of Lord Sydney, named Sydney Cove. Though the description given by the gentleman who first visited this port was truly luxuriant and wore the air of exaggeration, yet they had by no means done its beauties and conveniences justice, for, as a harbour, none that has hitherto been described equals it in spaciousness and safety. The land forms a number of pleasant coves, in most of which 6 or 7 ships may lie secured to the trees on shore. It contains likewise a number of small islands, which are covered with trees and a variety of herbage, all of which appears to be evergreens. The whole, in a word, exhibits a variety of romantic views, all thrown together into sweet confusion by the careless hand of nature. Well, dear Dick, now I have brought you all the way to Sydney Cove, I must tell you what we've done since our arrival on these seas, and in this port, what we are doing, what has happened, etc., etc. And so ends this historic letter from Naval Surgeon George Worgan, dated 12th of June 1788, and addressed to his brother Richard in England, and possibly written from a ship of the First Fleet, safe at anchor in the calm, pristine, and vast waters of Sydney Harbour. The letter, which must have taken months to arrive, is one of the earliest accounts of meetings between the first Australians and the newest. Surgeon Worgan of His Majesty's Navy seems a genial and observant man, and we're left wondering how he fared in this new world.